Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is elections. All democratic elections in the United States and especially elections in Israel. Once upon a time, elections were about policy. A candidate stood up, spoke up, and articulated the policies they would, if elected, carry forth. Then came polls. Positive polls were touted, negative polls were dismissed. Polls were treated like the holy grail. Today, policy has fallen to third place in the priority list of candidates. Polling, to the chagrin of most voters, still holds firm at second. But first and foremost comes a new entry into the political arena, populism. America or Israel? The political campaign game plan for candidates is the same, and voters are on to the game. The election of Donald J. Trump had a transformative impact on elections worldwide. Not only did he forever change the role of professional, seasoned politicians in search of higher office, he also changed, energized, popularized the art of campaigning. Trump was, and still is, a master populist communicator. The masses, thousands upon thousands at a time, still line up to gain entry into his rallies. Some even spend the night, sleeping bag in hand, to ensure a spot at the rally. Much like the President of the United States, Prime Minister Netanyahu is using the populism tool. And for Bibi, too, it is proving to be an effective tool. Populism, like polling, has the pretext of being about the people. Polls are supposed to tell us what the people want, need, think. Populism juxtaposes the people against the elite. A large part of the populist message is offering simple solutions to very difficult problems and issues that are confronting the voters. It is about distilling the problems into simple, catchy phrases. And then comes the twist. The populist then explains that it's the elite who are responsible for, who are to be blamed for, preventing these simple solutions from being implemented. Legal indictments against leaders, whether handed down by Israel or the United States, are flipped into an election weapon. Netanyahu's reaction to Trump's reaction would be the same. The spin goes something like this. The elites are attacking the man of the people. Bibi, of course, unlike his political contenders, is no longer a prince. He is now the representative of the masses. During his campaign, Donald Trump spoke about draining the swamps of Washington. His official slogan, now known simply as MAGA, was "Make America Great Again." Neither of those has yet to happen. In truth, they were both catchy slogans. They still are catchy slogans, but nothing more. When confronted, Trump blames the failure of his fulfillment of these slogans on the elite. They stymie him. They prevent him from fulfilling his promises. It's not his failure. It's their successful blocking of him that has caused the failure. Benny Gantz has watched carefully and learned well. Part of the success of his campaign thus far has been his reliance on slogans and his deliberate decision not to dive into policy statements. Gantz fundamentally understands that the less a candidate says about policy, the less people will have to disagree with him. Yair Lapid, now the seasoned politician, has learned to follow his lead. The original Gantz slogan was Yisrael Lifnei Hakol. That was the perfect example. Whether you use the simple translation as Israel before everything, or a more nuanced translation that Israel is our priority, the slogan chosen by Gantz mimics and is an exact parallel to candidate Trump's very successful Make America Great Again. Even the short video clip that Gantz posted in which he says, "For me, Israel comes before everything. Join me and we will launch on a new path because we need something different and we will create something different." And ends with him saying he thinks he has, quote, already said too much. Shows just how little policy he has prepared to put forth. And even when he makes a policy statement, he leaves voters wanting more. Gantz has said too little, just a slogan. In the 2016 U.S. presidential elections, Americans learned a valuable lesson about political polls. They are unreliable and often reflect a bias. Of all the polls and the countless polls predicting the election, only two, and one of them originated in India, consistently predicted that Donald Trump would emerge the victor. And then voila, today, American Jews and non-Jews, unaffiliated Jews, and deeply committed Jews, and religious Christians, people who are interested in the April 9th Israeli Knesset elections, want analysis, not party politics, and certainly not polls. And they are right. Even though it's fallen into the third place, concerned voters are still concerned with policy. And they have no interest in the Teleseker, Khan, Migdam, Ma'agar Machot, or in fact any of these polls. And their growing distrust in polls is common. Populism can be effective, but it is a vapid campaign tool. Polls are interesting, but often misleading. Policy is what counts, and today policy is what's missing. The next thing I've been thinking about is humor, and how humor is the perfect release for people under pressure, especially Israelis. One of the coping mechanisms that Israelis use to deal with the constant threat presented them by their enemies is humor. Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah is the leader of Hezbollah, the sworn enemy of Israel. And one day, a huge billboard was put up on a building overlooking the Ayalon Highway, one of Israel's most traveled roads, the highway that cuts right through Tel Aviv. Ostensibly, the billboard beckons Israelis to recycle their plastic bottles, with a twist. What you see is a large image, immediately identifiable to every Israeli as Nasrallah's white bearded head. On top, next to Nasrallah's head, the caption reads, "I don't recycle bottles." Underneath the image of Nasrallah is the caption, "Nasrallah has been stuck in a bunker for 12 years. What's your excuse?" Humor has always been an essential component of Israeli life because the risks are so high. Israelis, throughout the years, have used humor to obviate tension. There's a famous joke about the group of men who gather every day in the Tel Aviv cafe and bemoan the crisis du jour. They are afraid of terror, of the economic state of their country. They are afraid of corruption, of traffic accidents, even the weather and flash flooding that has killed hikers and school children really bothers them. Finally, one day, Moshe, one of the members of the group, shouts, "Enough! This is so depressing. Every day we talk about this crisis and that crisis. From this moment on, I'm an optimist." The next morning, as usual, the friends gather in the cafe. First to arrive is Moshe. After everyone is gathered, David asks Moshe. He says, "What's wrong, Moshe? Why are you looking so sad? We all thought you were now an optimist." And Moshe responds by saying, "Do you think it's easy being an optimist with all these terrifying issues surrounding us?" Freud gave some very important insight into humor. According to the Austrian Jewish neurologist, psychologist, the father of psychoanalysis, humor is actually critique, that it's sometimes insightful and always truthful, guised as a joke or a funny story. So whether consciously or unconsciously, the Israeli public makes fun of the crises and the pressures under which they live. They make fun of their enemies, even their arch enemies. Laughing and poking fun at the expense of Sheikh Nasrallah is nothing. You should hear what they have to say and joke about Iran. Of course, humor can sometimes fall flat, or be in poor taste, or politically incorrect. It pushes the envelope. In order to survive, societies need to be open to humor, even when it is not exactly their favorite form of humor, even when it appears to push the boundaries of political correct discourse. That is when it is crucial to remember that political humor is not discourse. It is critique and commentary. Humor and political humor specifically is rhetoric, most often one-sided rhetoric, is born because someone, some party, some society, or constituency has an axe to grind. Without all that, humor falls and fails, and what could have been laughed about becomes insulting. When humorists rely on foul language, it overshadows the content and the critique of the message. That's when the delivery and the medium become the message, and the message is totally lost. That's when the delivery becomes primary and the message is secondary. In our world today, humor is an essential tool of society. Political humor is a wonderful release. Young people involved in the sphere of new media learn more about politics from humor sites and humor YouTube videos and Comedy Central than they do from traditional news websites or news broadcasts. Print news no longer even enters the equation. Americans thrive on humor. So do the British. But one country's humor is often lost on the other. It's integral to be seeped in the culture or the society in order to poke fun at it or to be amused and impressed when someone else pokes fun at it. Interestingly, and very importantly, we do not hear a lot of humor coming out of the Islamic extremist groups. You can scour the internet looking for Al-Qaeda and ISIS humor, and you will come up empty. That's because the punishment meted out for making jokes about ISIS is death. Seriously, I kid you not. So, Israel drew a link between Nasrallah and the environment to promote recycling. That's a piece of humor, and it's got a double entendre. Why? It's funny because Nasrallah is trying to wipe Israel off the map, and Israel is using that to remind people how important it is to keep the earth clean and protect the environment for future generations. Nasrallah wants to destroy Israel, while Israel wants to save the world. That's not just humorous, it's truthful. Humor at its best. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. Both columns are from the New York Post. They could have been from any paper. So many websites and papers were running this story. I felt it important to take two views from the same media source to show a variety of views within the same media outlet. The simple subject is Democratic Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar. But it's more than that. It's not just about her. It's about how the Democrats are dealing with Omar and about clearly anti-Semitic views in the Democratic Party. First up is a New York Post column published online on February 11, 2019, and in print the next day, February 12th. Online, the headline reads, Pelosi and company flinch from truly confronting anti-Semitism. And in print, the headline read, Enabling Omar. This is an editorial. It's penned by the editorial board and does not have an author. Here is how it starts. It took hours of strong prodding by other Democrats, but Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other House leaders finally condemned the anti-Semitic tropes and prejudicial accusations by Representative Ilhan Omar. But instead of taking any punitive action, like stripping the Minnesota Democrat of her seat on the Foreign Affairs Committee, Pelosi and company merely called on her to apologize. It's all about the Benjamins, baby, Omar had claimed as she accused the lobbying group of literally buying congressional support for Israel. For those who did not get the lingo, Benjamins are $100 bills. In other words, Jews only connect to money. It was truly despicable. Omar tried to apologize, at least. She said she apologized, but really she didn't. The New York Post continues. But she took the cue to apologize. Unequivocally, she said, except she then pleaded ignorance of the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes and doubled down on their criticism of AIPAC and what she called the problematic role of lobbyists in our politics. Thing is, she should have gotten over her ignorance after last month's flap, when she had to pull back from her accusation that Israel has hypnotized the world, playing off another classic anti-Jewish slur. Yet Pelosi tried to play it all as some kind of teachable moment, announcing that Omar and I agreed that we must use this moment to move forward as we reject anti-Semitism in all forms. The New York Post explains that this new anti-Semitism is often excused as simply being anti-Israel. But what it really is blatant anti-Semitism. The New York Post explains this, which is typical. Omar and fellow freshman Representative Rashida Tlaib continually excuse their over-the-line language as mere criticism of Israel. And many of their colleagues play along. Deputy Majority Whip Dan Kildee, for example, said, we ought to tamp down a bit of the rhetoric, but also warned against going too far to make judgments about Omar's latest words. The editorial in the New York Post concludes, suggesting a serious double standard. They point out that when the Republican spoke out of line, the Ethics Committee took away his committee responsibilities. They write, finally, The failure to discipline Omar stands in marked contrast to House Republicans who stripped Representative Steve King of his committee assignments for lamenting the fact that white supremacy is deemed an offensive term. Second up is also from the New York Post and was published on the same days, February 11th and February 12th. In print, this piece is called "Why Omar Won't Pay for Peddling Bigotry." And online, the title is changed only slightly, "Why Ilhan Omar Won't Pay for Peddling Bigotry." This column is by Jonathan Tobin. Tobin follows similar lines of thinking as the New York Post editorial. He begins, "Ilhan Omar can't seem to help herself when it comes to anti-Semitism. The question is whether leading Democrats and never Trumpers who are repeatedly accused the White House of empowering anti-Semitism prepared to do about the Congresswoman from Minnesota." Omar tried to wiggle out of the implications of her earlier tweet about Israel, hypnotizing the world by claiming ignorance about its meaning. She said she didn't know she was tapping into an anti-Semitic trope when she smeared Israelis defending themselves against Hamas terrorists. The claim that Jews use wealth to get their way is another libel that is straight out of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the classic anti-Semitic hoax that has migrated from Tsarist Russia to the Muslim fever swamps. Tobin says that they get it all wrong. He writes, "It's also a deliberate misreading of reality. The overwhelming majority of members of Congress support Israel because the overwhelming majority of Americans agree. But to Israel haters, it's all a vast plot cooked up by dark conspiratorial Jewish forces. Americans like Israel for a variety of reasons, not the least shared democratic values. Most also think there's something wrong with those who want to destroy the one Jewish state on the planet. That's the goal of BDS, Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement, that Omar and her fellow Democrat, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, support. BDS masquerades as a call for justice, but its discriminatory purpose is indistinguishable from anti-Semitism. And if there was any doubt about that, both Omar and Tlaib have been doing their best to erase it with statements that illustrate the inextricable ties between BDS and hate. Tobin concludes by explaining that something is deeply wrong and must be corrected in the Democratic Party. Tobin writes, "The reason for this is obvious. Democrats, including many of those running for president, fear their party's hard left base is sympathetic to Omar and Tlaib. That's not just because of their identities as Somali and Palestinian American, respectively. The leadership also understands that a critical mass of Democratic activists has bought into the bogus intersectional theories that falsely link the struggle for civil rights in the United States to Palestinian war against Israel's right to exist. Unless and until Omar and Tlaib are not only condemned but isolated as anti-Semites by both Democrats and Republicans, there's little chance that this virus of hatred won't continue to spread." Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. Let's look at two cartoons today, one from Politico and the other from Powerline Blog. The first is drawn by M. Worker and was published February 12, 2019. We see a huge whistle with tremendous amplification called the Mega Dog Whistle. Republican elephants with red hats are polishing and manning the whistle, which is blurting out the name Soros in every direction. They're referring, of course, to Jewish billionaire George Soros. In the corner, Ilhan Omar, wearing a Stop AIPAC sign, is being targeted by an elephant with a red hat shouting, "Anti-Semite, anti-Semite." The obvious and sad point of the cartoon is that the artist thinks that the claims of anti-Semitism against Omar are bogus. I think you should decide. Next up is a picture of a note found in a Chinese restaurant on Christmas Day, December 25th, 2018. The note reads, "The Chinese Restaurant Association of the United States would like to thank the Jewish people. We do not completely understand your dietary customs, but we are proud and grateful that your God insists you eat our food on Christmas. Happy holidays." Just a brilliant commentary on America. We will get back to this in my Picanti conclusion. In a moment, more of my own perspectives and a few predictions. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is headquartered in Gaza, has as its goal the total destruction of Israel. They made the announcement on Iranian TV. The Islamic Jihad said that they have missiles now that they can launch from Gaza that can hit as far as Netanya, an Israeli city north of Tel Aviv. That's a very serious threat. The vast majority of Israelis, 2/3 of Israel, actually lives in a very small stretch, which ranges from just south of Tel Aviv to just north of Tel Aviv. It's very important to understand that just because a news item was broadcast on Iranian TV does not necessarily mean that it's true. What is true is that Iran has those rockets. The question is whether the Palestinian Islamic Jihad has been able to smuggle those rockets into Gaza. This is just one example of how Palestinian Islamic Jihad has come out strong, making statements about their prowess and capabilities, especially their ability to fire rockets that can hit places north in Israel. Why are they doing this? They're doing it because they need to. Islamic Jihad is making a statement of power on the streets of Gaza. Their goal is to wrestle power from Hamas, which is currently in control of Gaza. Islamic Jihad is a relatively small group, significantly smaller than Hamas. But in order for the Islamic Jihad to get more supporters, the Jihad must show that Hamas is no different than Abbas and his Fatah party and the Palestinian Authority. Islamic Jihad must show the Palestinians that the true protectors of Gaza and the Palestinians is the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And that's why we have started to see rallies and protests and hear public statements filled with bravado, telling people on the streets of Gaza how powerful Palestinian Islamic Jihad is. Tehran is suffering from a terrible problem: sinkholes. The ground simply opens up, and wherever and whatever is underneath falls into the earth. These sinkholes are being caused by a 30-year drought. The excessive water shortages caused by the ground to be very weak and to shift. In addition, because there are water shortages, Iran has been pumping more and more from their underground water, they're called aquifers. The water they pump is saltier by the year. Every year it's saltier and saltier. Regular water and the pumping process reduces the amount of water, which is in turn drying up the foundation of the ground surface area. And as a result, we have sinkholes. 8 million people live in Tehran. The risks to buildings, roads, infrastructure are enormous. It could all be solved by improving the water situation. But given the sanctions imposed on Iran, that isn't going to happen. Iranian leadership will hopefully wake up and see the crisis, hopefully before it's too late. We need to be kept abreast of the happenings on college campuses. The state of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel activity is unbelievable. Galei Tzahal, also known as Israeli Army Radio, posted an audio recording of a Hebrew University professor that's from Jerusalem in Columbia University, an Ivy League college in Manhattan. Professor Nadira Shalhoub Kevorkian said that Israel experiments on Palestinians, that Israel tests all kinds of weapons on Palestinian towns. The title of her talk was Disturbing Spaces, Violent Technologies in Palestinian Jerusalem. The idea that Israel uses Palestinian neighbors and villages as fields for testing sites for new weapons is way off the charts. In addition to the weapons, she asserted that the IDF experiment with tactics. She actually said, and I'm quoting here, they check for which bombs to use, gas bombs or stink bombs, whether to put plastic sacks or cloth sacks, to beat us with their rifles, to kick us with their boots. The end of quote. The IDF evaluates, critiques every single action. The post-op after a military operation is written up and discussed on every level. Lessons are gleaned in successes, failures, all of it. The successes they look at, and they look to see how to improve. The same is done for failures. This is hardly called experimenting. Remember the woman in Iran who stood up on the transformer box and took off her white hijab and waved it like a flag? The woman who was then arrested, fired from her job, convicted of indecency and willingly violating the law. The woman who was sentenced to 3 years in prison and was threatened with taking her child Viana away. Before the prison term began, Azam Jaganvi escaped Iran with her daughter and is now awaiting asylum. She sat down for an interview with Reuters and described her situation and why she took a stand. This is what she said, and I'm quoting here, "I was telling myself, Viana should not grow up in the same conditions in this country that you grew up in. I found a human smuggler with a lot of difficulty. It all happened very quickly. I left my life, my house, my car behind. This woman is a hero. She and her daughter are also in danger. Her message is very important." For years it has been known that Israel and Saudi Arabia have had discussions and communications. There are established lines of communication. But what is new is that the Saudis now have admitted to a relationship. The admission officially sanctions the dialogue. It became official through Turki al-Faisal, the former ex-chief of Saudi intelligence. He said that Israel and the Saudis have been talking for 25 years. This was all made public in an interview that was published in both Israeli media and Qatari media. Light is shining, and many things like this are coming out of the dark and into the light. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Yes, Jews love Chinese food. Actually, a little-known fact is that the first kosher restaurant to always open in the community is a pizza parlor. And interestingly, it also must sell falafel. The second kosher eatery is always a Chinese restaurant. How did this love of Chinese food emerge? It happened with the integration of immigrant communities. The immigrant community of Jews lived next to the immigrant community of Chinese. So what about Christmas and the Jews eating Chinese on Christmas? In the U.S., their new Christian land, everything was closed on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Jews weren't working, but neither were they celebrating. The Chinese eateries were the only place that was open, really, because they too did not celebrate Christmas. It was a perfect shidduch, a perfect match that became a tradition. So much so that when the Supreme Court Justice Ilana Kagan, the former dean of Harvard Law School, was asked during her nomination hearings for the Supreme Court what she did on Christmas, she responded that she did not remember exactly, but like most Jews, I probably had Chinese. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.